Hey everybody, Jeppy here, and today I'm going to show you everything we know about the truly psychotic killer that is the Doctor here in Dead by Daylight. Out of all of the killers in DBD, the Doctor isn't anywhere close to the top killer with the most amount of kills in the lore, but the experiments and torture he performed on his subjects might just crown him as the most diabolical killer in Dead by Daylight's lore. You guys voted for the Doctor in the most recent poll, so if you want to see more content surrounding DBD, then make sure to leave a like and comment below which killer you'd like to see added to the next poll. Now, with all that out of the way, let's start things off, as we always do, with when and where the Doctor was born. Chapter 1, The Doctor's Childhood. So the Doctor's real name is actually Herman Carter, and well, we don't know where Herman was born, but I can make a good assumption on around what year he was born and what year the entity took him into its realm in the trials. But I'll get back to that later, as I'll need to explain his lore more for it to make sense to you guys. Anyways, Herman Carter was a very intelligent person from a very early age. Growing up, he would vastly excel in school and really learn how to understand the human psyche. Even in middle and high school, the brain fascinated him. The trillions and trillions of neurons embedded into the brain interested him so much that we'll see how the brain was the main focus of his inhumane experiments we'll talk about later in the video. His teacher started to catch on just to how truly intelligent Herman was. Acing every class, he actually got published in the local newspaper named Partisan, a psychology gazette. Quickly after graduating high school, Herman was fast-tracked to Yale's advanced neuroscience program, but he wasn't sent there just to learn. The CIA were funding it, searching for new doctors willing to run horrendous experiments on captured prisoners. Tensions between the United States and Russia were at an all-time high, and each side was always on the lookout of spies sent from the other country. And with spies came information, and that's what the CIA needed: more information. They needed to know as many things about their enemy as possible. So when they would capture a spy, any means necessary to obtain that knowledge was fair game. All they needed were brilliant people like Herman. Chapter 2, Lery's Memorial Dark Secrets. Herman Carter and other top-tier promising recruits for these experiments were transferred from Yale all the way to a secret black site facility in Illinois called Lery's Memorial Institute. That name may sound familiar to you guys, as it's one of the maps here in DBD that launched alongside the Doctor. Even though Herman was a prodigy destined to unlock the brain's secrets, he still needed a mentor. That mentor would be Dr. Otto Stamper, who taught him everything he knows and ingrained into Herman's mind that information is everything and knowledge is power. With all surgical and non-surgical instruments provided, they got to work. With each passing day, Herman would see less and less of the sun, spending all of his hours in the lab researching on ways to extract information from people. Whether positive cooperation or torture was the right answer, Herman started leaning more and more to the torture method. At first, methods would be experimented on volunteer participants and sometimes even colleagues of his own, other students. Each person was given a word that they must keep a secret to themselves until they couldn't take it anymore, usually only after very minor methods to extract the information. I mean, after all, they were volunteers and other students. Herman wasn't satisfied until one night when, like any other routine experiment, things went very wrong. Chapter 3, The Cabin Experiments. Herman was the lead doctor in this experiment and was supposed to be the bad doctor, while a fellow colleague was supposed to be the good doctor. They were performing an experiment on fellow students, and again, they had to hold on to their secret word the best they can. Of course, there were limits. They couldn't actually be tortured, of course, but the experiment took place in an old rusty shack in the middle of the woods. Herman remembered that they had a whole week by themselves with the test subjects to extract the information. Then the professors would arrive to examine the results. 7 days. Herman became furious with these limitations and lack of progress from the good doctor's colleagues' methods. All he would do was shout at all 7 of the students. Big deal, Herman thought. They know they're safe. Shouting isn't going to do anything. On the next day, day 2, they began to deprive them of food and water as well as sleep. But still, nothing. None of the students gave up their words. The good doctor's methods were not working. That's when the beast awoke from within the psyche of Dr. Herman Carter. He wanted to take the interrogation to the next level. So before he could even think about what he was doing, he grabbed an old piece of wood on the ground of the cabin and bashed the back of Good Doctor's head as he hit the floor, wasn't expecting it, and tied him up. All of the students were horrified. No one was actually supposed to get hurt for this experiment, but with all of them tied up in chairs, there's really nothing they can do, which was perfect for Herman. Carter ties up one of the students harder to a chair and begins literally peeling the skin off of the scared man's face. Warm blood dripping down and beginning to pool on the floor. That's all that was needed. All 7 students already gave up their secret words and were begging to be set free. But Carter smiles and says, "We still got a few days." He didn't care. His career of medicine would be over and would very likely be thrown in jail. He was fascinated in the brain and figured a few days of fun experiments would be worth the lifetime of imprisonment. So he got back to work. Dr. Carter wanted to manufacture a new reality of these subjects and eventually hoped to introduce some form of mind control into them to see if he can get them to do whatever he wanted to do. He started blaring music with an audio frequency that could just barely be heard by the human ear that triggers the feeling of fear, anxiety, and discontent in the students. He also peeled all of the students' eyelids permanently open with toothpicks to keep them awake and scared. He also began to wonder how he could quote-unquote re-mother these subjects via lobotomy or electric shock therapy to turn these sheep into wolves in order to do whatever Dr. Carter wants of them. Fueled with a manic rage, he found a lamp in the cabin, cut and peeled the wire, exposing it, placed one end of the wire into a student's mouth, and slowly plugged it into the outlet while staring into the eyes of the student. Screaming erupted throughout the cabin as the smell of burning flesh reached Dr. Carter's nose. He laughed and thought to himself that he hasn't felt this stimulated in ages. To be free. To be truly free. Dr. Carter performs neurosurgery on one of the subjects in search of a gland he read in one of his books in the brain that secretes the hormone DMT. He wonders if he can extract this gland from the brain and get the DMT from the gland from a living subject and force another student to take it and, well, see what the effects of it would do. Carter fuels up the Good Doctor, who's been tied up in a chair this whole time, with drugs and what other methods he already used with mind control with electroshock therapy. He cuts the rope that the Good Doctor was tied to and tells the now crazed and loopy man that the rest of the test subjects tied up are Russian spies. And well, the Good Doctor believed him. It worked. Dr. Carter handed Good Doctor a spoon and ordered him to kill one of the subjects. He laughed as his brilliant plan worked. He actually got another human being to do something they would have never done otherwise. Brilliant. Just then, his professor busts through the cabin door with 2 CIA officers surrounding him. Carter was sure the government men would send him to jail for the truly horrific scene he has made in that little cabin. But instead, Dr. Otto and the CIA agents calmly walked around the cabin and saw one of the barely breathing students and told Herman that they heard the whole thing. The cabin was bugged. All the screams and torture, they allowed it. They put Dr. Carter in handcuffs, but only to make it look like they were putting him under arrest to the public. But Dr. Carter was confused. Why were they not going to arrest him? Dr. Otto, which was his mentor, leaned in close to his ear and said, "You understand much more than others. Welcome to MK Awakening." Chapter 4, The Mad Doctor. Yes, Dr. Carter was granted full permission to pursue his work in information extracting with the CIA and was never charged for the crimes he committed to those students. I'm assuming all the subjects were killed as I couldn't find any information on if they testified in court against him. Anyways, this is where the true horrors of the Doctor are. His new role as one of the leaders of Project Awakening began. They described it as experimental interrogation. Literally anything he wanted to do or any equipment he wanted to use would be supplied and available to him. After a few months, nobody would knock on the door to his lab anymore. The screams filled the hallways outside his lab, coming from any captured, guilty, or innocent supposed Russian spy was sent to him. But how can you know someone was actually innocent and didn't know anything and not just hiding information? Well, you can't, and eventually the captor would succumb to the doctor's torture and die. He'd wipe his hands, clean off his table, and get the next subject ready for him. The lights outside the lab would flicker more and more as electricity would be the doctor's favorite form of extracting information. He became a legend throughout the facility, and prisoners would beg for mercy and to be taken to literally any other interrogator than Dr. Carter's lab. He would keep to himself, and people began to forget what he even really looked like. No one actually really saw him, only to deliver a new test subject or supplies. No one knew what happens to the prisoners after he successfully extracted the information. No one really truly knew what was going on behind those closed doors. This went on for years, literally years of repeated torture. Then Lery's Memorial Institute fell silent for a week. The screaming stopped along with the flickering lights, and I think the lore of the doctor says this the best, so I'm just going to read the next part directly from his lore. Quote, Carter's experimental information extraction had turned to horrific and bizarre torture. Patients and prisoners were found dead or in vegetative states with all types of head trauma. In his office, they found the most terrible discovery of all. Dr. Stamper himself, his head peeled open and an array of electrodes and sensors inserted into his still working but annihilated brain. There was no sign of Herman the Dr. Carter, but his research papers suggested that he had been using the prisoners as part of an awful ECT experiment as he searched for the panacea of mind control. The government didn't want to know. The black site was condemned and all knowledge of Lery's Memorial Institute redacted forever. End quote. Chapter 5, The Entity. Okay guys, so it's pretty safe to say that the entity reached into our world and grabbed Dr. Herman Carter out of Lery's Memorial Institute, and that's why the screams were silent for a week. So this is where we can make the assumption that the entity claimed Dr. Carter in the year 1983, because that's when the government closed it down and actually leveled it to the ground with controlled explosions, probably in an attempt to cover up what truly happened there. So I think I know around which time the doctor was born then. Since Lery's Institute was successfully turned over to the CIA and set up to operate in the year 1970, then that means that that's the time Dr. Carter was sent there from Yale University. Since Herman graduated high school and immediately went to Yale afterwards, I think it's safe to say that Dr. Herman Carter was born somewhere between the years of 1945 and 1950. But something caught my eye while looking at the doctor. There does seem to be a fair amount of damage and uncomfortable things on his body. So either he chose to look like this in the trials to induce more fear to the survivors we play as in Dead by Daylight, or he was tortured by the entity itself after being taken because he didn't want to be a killer in its realm. And if you think about it, it actually kind of makes sense he was tortured from the entity because he was so focused and dedicated to his work that he probably was very upset to just be taken from it by the entity and probably refused to be a killer for a short while after. Either that, or he enjoys having these sharp metal pieces forcing his eyes open and prying his lips apart. And if that's the case, then, well, that's weird. Well, guys, what'd you think about the doctor's lore? Like I said, he might be truly the most evil killer in Dead by Daylight because he truly seemed like he enjoyed the torture on his subjects. If you enjoyed the video and think I did a good job making it, then make sure to leave a like and subscribe notifications if you're new. Now, with all that being said, Jippy!